1:40, 30th of December, 2025. Pine Forest east of Luhansk, 27 kilometers from the front line. Inside the R149MA1, the night duty crew locks the cadence for the dawn artillery strike. The P168 fills the vehicle compartment with a steady static tone, and the 30-kilowatt generator keeps the current stable. On the tactical display, 18 stationary targets. The firing time has been fixed and is drawing near. This distance is called the rear, far enough that all attention stays on the map. Above, at an altitude of 2,400 meters in the darkness, a Leleka 100 hangs motionless, recording thermal signatures, antennas, and patrol cycles. It only needs to be there long enough when every assumption has settled into habit. In the weeks before, 4 command posts near the front line were wiped off the map while still within a radius of under 10 kilometers. After these losses, a new rule was applied. C2 nodes must pull back beyond 25 kilometers, based on the assumption that attack UAVs operate effectively only within 10 to 15 kilometers, and that this distance is sufficient to separate the rear from direct risk. The defensive posture at this node was built exactly to that rule. No air defense radar, no man pads, only Pole 21, sweeping the 400 to 900 MHz band toward the front line to counter familiar FPV UAVs. Patrols continued, but alertness was dialed down because the rear was considered to have nothing to watch. The blind spot formed from the very way they defined the threat. They prepared for low-flying, bomb-carrying UAVs, but not for high-altitude, slow, unarmed reconnaissance types operating outside the sweep band. And when the node began transmitting at high power at 120 to lock the firing time, that very signal made its thermal and radiation signature unmistakable, opening the attack window itself. 22:20 on the 29th of December, 2025, as the night duty shift had just settled into rhythm, a Leleka 100 left the launcher and climbed to an altitude of 2,400 meters in near total silence. At that distance, it lay outside ground visual range and outside the sweep band that the EW systems below were concentrating toward the front line. Time moved slowly from the high-altitude perspective. On thermal imagery, the generator appeared as an unchanging bright point. Beneath the forest canopy, a 10-meter antenna stood exposed in a clearing. Farther out, the security force moved along the same route, repeated enough times that it was no longer vigilance, but habit. Each patrol cycle that passed sharpened the picture. Leleka did not need to transmit strongly. Data was pushed back in small pulses, enough to hold the link, enough to measure timing, and enough to wait. Below, EW continued to do exactly what it was designed to do. Scan for low-flying UAVs toward the front line. No warning, no strange signals, no reason to suspect the sky behind. 1:20. When the node began transmitting at high power to lock the firing time, the generator's rhythm shifted, the thermal signature swelled, lights came on inside the vehicle compartment. At an altitude of 2,400 meters, this was no longer observation. It was a signal. The window had opened, and it would not open a second time. 1:35. Data from Leleka reaches the C2 center like a fully assembled picture. The node is transmitting at high power, the generator running at full load, signals thickening precisely when they are busiest. Inside the vehicle compartment, the static of the P168 blends with the generator's noise into a continuous background layer, masking all other sounds. This is not just peak operational tempo, it is the moment the system makes itself deaf. The decision is made within 2 minutes, cold and without debate. No HIMARS, no expensive missiles, only timing. The target is not the vehicle, but power first, then C2. Cut the power, and everything goes dark at once. Break C2, and the command chain collapses on its own, because no remaining point holds enough authority to keep the rhythm. No second strike is needed in the operational sense. The rest will slide apart on its own, because it was designed to depend on a single node, 4 medium-range loitering UAVs leave the launcher with coordinates locked in from 3 hours of observation. They fly low at 80 meters along a pre-mapped corridor, where there is no radar and no reason to be on alert. 18 minutes of flight are 18 minutes in which nothing below appears abnormal enough to force anyone to ask questions. Leleka still hangs overhead, not pressing, only confirming that the distance is closing exactly as planned. Inside the R149MA1, the duty officer fixes his eyes on 18 targets. H-hour is 20 minutes away. The P-168 transmits continuously to maintain links with 36 barrels of 2 S-19 MST-S and 2 infantry brigades awaiting orders. Maps, timelines, and report feeds fill the vehicle compartment. No one looks outside because everything that matters is assumed to be on the screens. For them, a rear area 27 kilometers away is not a distance. It is a conclusion accepted in advance. Outside the node, Pole 21 continues to scan and jam toward the front line exactly as designed. Patrols still move along the familiar cycle of the 4th night shift. Every movement follows procedure, and precisely because everything follows procedure, no one opens their view toward the rear. The blind spot does not form from a lack of equipment. It forms from the assumption that there is nothing to look for. By the time the 4 UAVs are only a few hundred meters from the node, inside the vehicle, there is still dense static and the steady roar of the generator. The final command before H-hour is being read out, each word encoded and transmitted according to procedure. And at that moment, the gap between what they believe is happening and what is happening collapses to zero. By the time they have reason to react, time no longer belongs to them. 1:56. The first UAV dives into the 30-kilowatt generator at a 45-degree angle, slamming directly into the engine block and tearing the night with a brief flash. Power cuts instantly. Inside the R149MA1, control screens go black almost simultaneously, with the P-168 radio falling silent in the middle of a transmitted order. The coordination rhythm that existed a second earlier disappears, leaving a hollow silence that triggers instinctive reactions from the crew. Turning, searching for power, searching for channels, searching for an explanation. But before they can understand what has just happened, the next strike hits. The second UAV slams straight into the control cabin, ripping open the roof and crushing the C2 display cluster and radio encryption unit. The 10-meter antenna collapses, dragging signal cables with it, as if someone had yanked the line from their hands. Inside the cramped compartment, 2 officers are thrown to the floor, and in the chaotic moments that follow, no one has enough data to distinguish between a technical accident and a deliberate attack, because all their normal reference points have shut down at once. The third strike finishes what remains. It finds the P-168 radio rack at the rear of the vehicle, and when the explosion occurs, the R149MA1 becomes a smoking mass of twisted metal. Fiber optic links connecting distant units are severed completely, and the communications network shuts down simultaneously as the control center with its main breaker is pulled. Only then does the nature of the strike become clear. They were not hit for being in the wrong place, but because the entire system depended on a single rhythm, and that rhythm has just been cut. 200. The preset moment for the dawn artillery strike arrives. This is the firing time around which the entire plan revolves, the instant when artillery batteries are to receive the order to fire simultaneously along a pre-locked target chain. But that moment passes in silence. The fire order does not appear, and 36 barrels of 2 S-19 MST-S wait amid prolonged radio static. A battalion commander attempts to reach the now lost headquarters, but receives no response. The longer he waits, the more the operational rhythm slips away, and eventually some units are forced to fire according to the old plan, only to realize the targets have shifted and rounds fall into empty areas. At the front line, an infantry brigade requests urgent fire support, but without updated authentication codes to validate the order, the artillery refuses to fire. Within a 15-kilometer radius, 12 units fall into independent operation. Some choose targets on their own, Others remain stationary for fear of breaking procedure. In both cases, synchronization dies with the C2 node, not because of a lack of weapons or will, but because the system locks itself when authentication is lost. The strike does not kill many people, but it kills synchronization, turning a coordinated offensive into fragmented actions with no operational value. 300. A backup node is activated, but comes on air in a data blackout. No picture from 3 hours earlier, no priority order, no rhythm to pull units back into a single direction. Another hour is lost patching the lines, and by the time the system reassembles into a coherent picture, the window has closed. By the time they are operational again, the most valuable thing has already slipped away.